When my son laid a hand on me, I froze. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt something in me snap quietly, like a thin branch breaking under weight. It was late in the evening, the house dimly lit, the kind of silence that usually feels safe. But that night, the silence pressed on me, heavy and cold. I couldn't believe it. My own child, the boy I had held in my arms, raised and nurtured, had just hit me. I remember the moment exactly. He was angry, frustrated, words sharp and cutting, and before I could say anything, it happened. My heart raced, my hand shook, and for a split second, I wanted to run, to hide, to let the world swallow me up. But I stayed. I looked at him, really looked, and somewhere deep inside, a strange calm settled. I smiled. Not a real smile, more like a quiet shield, a thin line between shock and survival. The house felt different after that. The walls seemed to hold a memory, every shadow whispering what had just happened. I went to my room, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed. I could hear him in the other room, muttering, pacing, angry words spilling into the empty air. And yet I felt no hatred, only sorrow and an unexpected clarity. I've always believed that family is sacred, that no matter the mistakes, the bonds are strong. I had raised my children with care, with patience, trying to teach them kindness, respect, and strength. And yet here I was, confronted with something I never imagined: betrayal from the person I loved most. I thought about the years behind me, sleepless nights, school lunches packed, birthday parties, scraped knees kissed better. I thought about all the times I had forgiven little mistakes, encouraged, guided. And now, in one instant, all those memories collided with this shocking moment. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to shout, to demand respect, to assert that no child has the right to touch their parent in anger. But another part of me, the quieter, wiser part, whispered, "Wait, observe, understand." I went to bed that night feeling fragile, but also strangely determined. I knew that tomorrow would be different. The day after a storm is never the same as the day before. I didn't know what justice would look like or how it would come. I only knew that I had to be steady, calm, and strong. And so I slept lightly, listening to the house breathe, listening to my own heart. I didn't know it yet, but the next morning, everything would change, and not just for him. My son's anger didn't come out of nowhere. He's always been a sensitive boy, quick to frustration, and sometimes words slip from him before he even inks. But hitting me, that was new. I had to take a step back and remember who he really was beyond that single moment. Our family had always been close. My husband passed years ago, and I raised my children mostly on my own. We had our struggles, of course, money tight at times, disagreements over small things, but love always held us together. My son was the oldest, strong-willed, protective of his younger siblings. He was also stubborn, and I often had to fight just to let him make his own mistakes. I guess he carried that stubbornness into adulthood. I remember mornings when he was small, rushing to school, backpack slipping off his shoulders, and I'd chase him down the street just to tie his shoes. I'd pack his lunch, leave little notes in his bag, and watch him leave with a smile. Those tiny, quiet acts of love felt simple then, but looking back, I realize how deeply they shaped the bond we shared. As he grew older, our relationship changed. Teen years brought rebellion, clashing opinions, and tension that sometimes simmered under the surface. I tried to be patient, reminding myself that the young man he was becoming needed guidance, not judgment. Still, I never imagined that one day he would raise his hand to me. That evening, after the incident, I went about my routines quietly. I made tea, washed the dishes, and tried to keep my thoughts from spiraling. I watched him in the kitchen,
moving around the counters, avoiding my eyes, and I realized how fragile our connection had become. Every word now seemed heavy, every glance loaded with unspoken feelings. I thought about our home, the pictures on the walls, the family cable where we shared meals, the living room where we laughed over old movies. All of it felt familiar, yet strange, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. In that quiet, I promised myself that I wouldn't let fear or anger dictate my actions. I would act with clarity. I would respond with calm, with dignity, and yes, with justice. Not revenge, but a lesson that would stick, a lesson he would never forget. I also realized I had to prepare him in my own way to face the consequences of his actions. Parenting didn't end when a child grew up. The role evolved, yes, but love and guidance were lifelong responsibilities. I had to remind him, gently, firmly, that respect is never optional. And so I planned the next morning carefully. A breakfast would be served, but it wouldn't be ordinary. It would be a moment of reflection, a subtle reminder of values, and a way to begin healing. I didn't know how he would react, but I knew I had to remain steady. If you've ever faced a difficult moment with someone you love, you know how hard it is to balance patience and discipline. Stories like mine aren't easy, but sharing them helps others feel less alone. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world, and it helps me bring more real-life stories like this to life.
The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I moved slowly, making coffee, setting the table, arranging a simple breakfast. Every movement felt deliberate, like a small act of control in the storm that had hit our home the night before. I wanted this morning to be calm, but I also wanted it to carry a lesson, even if he didn't realize it yet. When he appeared in the kitchen, his face was tight, eyes avoiding mine. He mumbled a good morning and went to sit at the table. I poured him a cup of coffee and placed a plate in front of him. I could feel the tension thick between us, like fog that wouldn't lift. I stayed silent at first, letting the morning settle. "Did you sleep well?" I asked finally, my voice soft. He shrugged, looking down at his plate. His hands trembled slightly, whether from guilt or frustration, I couldn't tell. We ate quietly. I noticed the small things, the way he picked at his food, how his fork hovered over the scrambled eggs, the tight set of his jaw. Every action spoke louder than words. I wanted to speak, to scold, but I held back. Instead, I let the silence do some of the work. After a few minutes, I spoke again, gently, almost conversationally. "You know, hitting me, it changes things." His fork paused mid-air, and I could feel him stiffen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look angry, but the weight of my words seemed to settle on him. I didn't mean it," he started, but stopped. The words felt small, inadequate, and he knew it. "I know you didn't mean it," I said quietly, "but it happened, and we can't pretend it didn't." My voice was steady, calm. I could see him struggling, emotions swirling behind his eyes, shame, confusion, frustration. This was the moment where lessons are learned, where choices are confronted. The rising tension wasn't loud. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, just small, subtle cues, the kind that make a house feel smaller, heavier. I noticed the way he avoided eye contact, how his shoulders seemed to slump, how every word he tried to speak came out clipped and unsure. I didn't want him to feel attacked. I wanted him to feel the consequences of his actions. Respect isn't just demanded, it's earned, reinforced, and sometimes painfully reminded. We finished breakfast in silence, but the air had shifted. Something unspoken passed between us, a recognition that things could not return to the way they were immediately. There was a fracture,
small but real, and I could feel it. And yet, beneath it all, I still loved him, still hoped he would understand, still believed in the bond we shared. That day, everything felt fragile. Every word, every movement, every glance held weight. And I knew, deep inside, that the moment of truth, the moment where justice, understanding, and change would collide, was coming soon. By midday, the tension in the house felt almost tangible. I had finished my chores, and he was quietly in his room, probably avoiding me. I didn't rush him. I knew this wasn't the time for anger or confrontation. But deep down, I also knew that the moment of truth was near, the moment where choices would reveal character and actions would carry weight. When he finally came into the living room, I was sitting on the couch, a cup of tea in hand. I could see the mix of emotions on his face: guilt, embarrassment, and something else, a flicker of defiance, maybe, or confusion. I stayed calm, letting him settle, letting the silence stretch just enough for him to feel it. "Sit down," I said gently. He hesitated, then obeyed. I poured another cup of tea for him and placed it on the table. There was no judgment in my eyes, only a quiet determination. "We need to talk," I said softly, "about what happened last night." He looked down at his hands, avoiding my gaze. I'm sorry," he muttered, almost a whisper. I could feel the weight of those words, small and heavy at the same time. But I didn't respond immediately. I wanted him to understand that words alone weren't enough. Actions have meaning, too. "I need you to understand that what you did, it crossed a line. You cannot lay a hand on someone you love, not in anger, not in frustration. It changes everything." He swallowed hard. I could see his chest rising and falling quickly, a sign of his nervousness, maybe even fear. I didn't mean to hurt you," he said again. "I know you didn't mean it," I replied calmly. "But the truth is, it happened. And when actions speak louder than words, you must face them." I leaned back slightly, watching him process, watching him understand the gravity of the situation. And then I did something I hadn't expected, something that would become the turning point. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and began preparing his favorite breakfast: eggs, toast, a little fruit on the side. The simple act of serving him was deliberate, intentional. It was a test of responsibility, a reminder that respect and love are intertwined. When I placed the plate in front of him, I looked him straight in the eyes. "Eat," I said softly, "and remember this moment. Think about what it means to respect others, and especially those who love you unconditionally." He looked up, meeting my gaze for the first time in hours. Something shifted. I could see it in his eyes: understanding, regret, and maybe even relief. That quiet breakfast became more than food. It became a lesson, a reminder, a chance for redemption. If you've ever faced a moment where someone you love has hurt you, you know how fragile and powerful it feels at the same time. And if you're finding this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps bring more real-life stories like this to life, and together we can learn from each other's experiences. After that morning, the house felt different. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but in the quiet, subtle shifts that happen after a storm passes. The tension hadn't completely vanished, but there was space now. Space for reflection, for understanding, for change. My son didn't speak much at first. He went about his day, completing small tasks, his movements careful, deliberate. I could see him thinking, wrestling with his own emotions. It wasn't easy, I knew that. Facing the reality of what he had done, the hurt he had caused, it takes courage. And I also realized that courage wasn't about anger or punishment alone. Sometimes it's about seeing the consequences of your actions reflected back at you, calmly, without rage, without escalation. Later that afternoon, he came to me. His voice was quiet, tentative. "Mom, I've been thinking about this, about last night." He paused, searching my eyes for a reaction. I waited. I didn't interrupt. I simply nodded. He continued, "I was wrong. I shouldn't have hit you. I don't even know why I did it." His words felt heavy, but honest. That honesty, fragile as it was, carried more weight than any apology could alone. I reached out and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "I know," I said softly. "What matters now is that you understand, that you learn from this. Everyone makes mistakes, but how we face them, how we take responsibility, that defines us." We spent the next hour talking quietly. Not arguing, not blaming, just sharing thoughts, fears, and regrets. I told him how hurt I had felt, how confusing it was to see the child I raised act in that way. He shared his frustration, his guilt, and the stress he had been carrying silently. In that room, the walls seemed to breathe again. The tension slowly lifted, replaced by something warmer, gentler, the beginning of healing. By evening, things had shifted noticeably. He helped set the table for dinner, his movements careful but purposeful. He smiled softly at me, a small gesture, but enough to feel the bond returning. We weren't back to normal yet, that would take time, but the first steps had been taken, and that's all I could hope for. I realized something important that day. Love isn't just about hugs, smiles, or shared memories. Sometimes love is quiet strength, patience, and letting someone face the consequences of their actions while still offering them a path back. True connection isn't destroyed by a mistake. It's strengthened by the courage to confront it, learn, and grow together. In that quiet, I realized that justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's calm, intentional, and gentle, and sometimes it's served with breakfast. In the days that followed, life at home slowly began to feel normal again, but I noticed subtle changes, a softness in my son's voice, a carefulness in his movements, a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. He didn't need constant reminders or lectures. He was learning on his own, quietly, that respect and love go hand in hand. I often found myself reflecting on that morning, the breakfast, the conversation that followed. It was more than a meal. It was a moment, a turning point where patience and calm replaced anger, where love and discipline met. That day, I realized that parenting never truly ends. Our children grow, they make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes can shake us to our core. But what matters is how we guide them through those moments, with firmness and compassion. I also learned something about myself. That smile I gave the night he hit me wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was an anchor, a quiet signal that I wouldn't let fear or anger take over, that I could remain calm even when my heart was breaking. Sometimes the most powerful lessons aren't shouted, they're shown through patience, understanding, and unwavering love. We began to talk more openly after that. Small conversations that turned into long ones. He would check in, ask for advice, share frustrations without fear of judgment. The silence in tension had been replaced with connection. It wasn't immediate. It took time, effort, and reflection. But it was real, and that's what mattered. Looking back, I understand now that moments of conflict, even painful ones, can be opportunities. Opportunities to teach, to reflect, and to strengthen bonds. I could have responded with anger, with shouting, with punishment. But I chose calm, intentional action, and in doing so, I preserved not only my dignity, but the love and trust between me and my son. To anyone watching the story, I want you to remember this. Life will challenge your relationships. People you love may hurt you, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes not. But patience, understanding, and clear boundaries can turn even the most painful moments into lessons of growth and compassion. True justice isn't always about revenge or punishment. Sometimes it's about guiding someone toward the right path, even when it's hard, even when your heart is heavy. If this story touched you or reminded you of someone you love, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps bring more real-life stories to life, and together we can learn, heal, and grow from these shared experiences. In the end, I see now that love is resilient. It bends, it stretches, it endures, and sometimes it even heals through something as simple, yet powerful, as a quiet breakfast, a conversation, and the courage to face life's challenges with calm and grace.
In the quiet moments after that stormy night and the following breakfast, I found myself thinking a lot about life, about parenting, and about how fragile our bonds can sometimes be. It's strange. The very people we love most have the power to hurt us in ways we never imagine. And yet, it's also through these moments that the deepest lessons are learned. I thought about my son, the young man he is becoming. I realized that anger, frustration, and mistakes are part of growing up. None of us are perfect. We all stumble. But what we do after we stumble, how we face our mistakes, and how we seek to make amends, that's what shapes our character. And as a parent, my role isn't just to shield him from failure. It's to guide him, to help him understand the impact of his actions, and to offer him the chance to grow into a better person. That morning, serving him breakfast wasn't just about feeding him. It was about demonstrating a principle, that accountability and love can coexist. I wanted him to see that consequences don't have to come with anger or humiliation. They can come with patience, reflection, and quiet strength. And in doing so, I also reminded myself of something important, that justice isn't always loud or public. Sometimes it's private, calm, and intentional. I also reflected on forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean ignoring hurt or pretending nothing happened. It means acknowledging the pain, understanding it, and choosing to move forward with wisdom. I forgave my son, yes, but I also made it clear that respect must be earned and maintained. That balance between compassion and boundaries is what keeps relationships healthy and resilient. In a way, that small breakfast became a metaphor for life itself. Life doesn't always hand out lessons gently. Sometimes it challenges us suddenly, painfully, and unexpectedly. But within those challenges, there is an opportunity to teach, to learn, and to grow stronger. It's not the mistakes that define us, it's how we respond to them. I hope that anyone watching this story understands that relationships, especially those with family, are worth the effort it takes to preserve them. Love doesn't vanish when mistakes happen. It can be tested, yes, but it can also be strengthened. And in times of conflict, calmness, clarity, and patience often achieve what anger never could. These reflections aren't easy to live by. They take courage, self-control, and sometimes the willingness to face pain without immediately reacting. But the peace and understanding that follow are worth it. I can now see that parenting, love, and even justice aren't about control or fear. They're about teaching, guiding, and holding space for growth, for ourselves and for those we care about most. As days turned into weeks, our home slowly regained its warmth. The tension that had gripped the house like a heavy fog began to lift, replaced by moments of quiet connection and understanding. My son and I didn't need grand gestures to rebuild our relationship. Small things mattered: a shared cup of tea, a smile across the kitchen table, a conversation that lasted longer than a few minutes. I realized something profound during this time. Love isn't always loud or dramatic. It doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or grand celebrations. Sometimes love is quiet. It's sitting together after a storm, listening, understanding, and slowly rebuilding trust.
It's knowing that mistakes can happen, but that they don't have to define the relationship forever. My son began to show a subtle shift. He was more mindful of his words, more aware of the impact of his actions, and I, in turn, learned to let go of lingering resentment and focus on the moments of growth and connection. The house felt lighter, calmer, and the small gestures we shared, a nod, a hug, even just sitting silently together, carried more meaning than anything I could have imagined. I often think back to that morning, the breakfast, the conversation, the silent understanding, and I realize how powerful a single moment can be. That day wasn't just about discipline or correction. It was about teaching respect, demonstrating love, and showing that justice doesn't always require harshness. Sometimes it requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to face challenges with grace. To anyone watching this story, I hope it reminds you that even in moments of conflict, there is a path to healing. Relationships can be mended, trust can be rebuilt, and love, when approached with calm and care, can endure almost anything. Life will always challenge us, test our patience, and push us to our limits. But if we respond with clarity, compassion, and understanding, we can turn even the hardest experiences into lessons of growth and connection. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you love, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing real-life stories that inspire reflection, empathy, and hope. Together, we can create a space where people learn from each other, find comfort, and discover that even in difficult moments, there is always a way forward. As I close the story, I feel a deep sense of peace. My son and I are still learning, still growing, and still navigating life together. But I know one thing for certain. Love, patience, and quiet strength have the power to heal even the deepest wounds. And sometimes the simplest acts, a meal, a conversation, a calm presence, can change everything.